Dedicated to the dreamers. Yeah. Life in the grind. It's dedicated to the dreamers. It's life in the grind. Dedicated to the dreamers. Dream big, have faith, work hard. Never quit, put your trust in God. Stay true and remember who you are. Never forget how you made it this far. Dream big, have faith, work hard. Never quit, put your trust in God. Stay true and remember who you are. Never forget how you made it this far. I feel like this world is trying to break my soul. I say no, I say no, I say no, you can't take it.
What's going down, everybody? Welcome to the Root of It All show. I am your host, Jody McGarity Jr., and we're coming with episode 2 of our podcast. And my guests today are some dynamic people. We have the Dr. William and his wife, Lizette Goodloe, who are the co-founders of an awesome organization called Behind the Whistle. We're going to be talking about some hot topics and what's challenges that we're facing today. And we are happy to have them on to be able to shed their wisdom. Goodloes, how y'all doing today?
We're doing all right.
Yeah, doing well. Yes, sir.
Good. Appreciate y'all being on the show. Before we get started, I'm not a fan of canned bios, and so reading off of scripts, I believe people can be able to tell us about themselves more than what I can describe or read off a bio. So please tell us, who are the Goodloes?
Who are you?
Well, I am originally from the Rio Grande Valley. I'm from Harlingen, Texas. And that is also known as North Mexico. When we talk about the state of Texas, we usually talk about San Antonio being South Texas. Well, I'm even further south than that. I grew up in a home where both my parents were educators. My dad coached for 32 years, and my mom was a kindergarten teacher for 31 years. Her story is kind of amazing because she taught at the exact same place for those entire 31 years, and she was the grandma of the school when she retired. She also was a substitute teacher there for 10 years afterwards. She couldn't get away. So that was interesting. I went to school at Harlingen South High School. There's only 2 in the town of Harlingen, and that's where my dad coached. And I decided to go to school there because I wanted to be with him on campus. Mm-hmm. And when I graduated from there, I went to Southwestern University in Georgetown and got my degree in communication studies and a minor in Spanish, and then started teaching and coaching at Fox Tech High School here in San Antonio. And that's where everything began. And I think I've returned to San Antonio. This is my 3rd time now.
Wow. All right. Well, I am William Goodloe. I am originally from the Golden State, California. I was born in San Diego, raised in Spring Valley, which is, inside of San Diego County. I always tell the joke, and my wife laughs every time. I'm from an unincorporated community in San Diego County, Spring Valley. Stand up. That's how we do it. And in Spring Valley, man, it's just a lot of hardworking people, working class, middle class. I like to call it upper, lower class people, where you learn some values of hard work. Telling things like they are, and you better learn how to fight too, because you're probably going to fight in Spring Valley at some point or other. But anyway, I grew up playing sports. I started playing when I was 5. Baseball was my first sport. I would watch baseball all day long before I watched football or basketball. But I grew up playing baseball, 4 sports really. I went to Monte Vista High School. Shout out to the Monarchs. And under Ed Carberry in football, Zach Peck in basketball, and Coach Rodney Van in track, and just different experiences kind of led me through a lot of stereotypes to the University of Texas to play football right there off of I-35, where we hear a car crash at least twice a practice. And then engage in our own car crashes in between snaps. on the football field. And so, and my journey did not end at UT with a degree. And I ended up traveling around, being a father and doing different things. And so that led me all over the place until I got to the Valley, Rio Grande Valley, down in North Mexico, as Lizette put it. And my experiences there kind of pushed me into a return to college, and I graduated from the University of Incarnate Word here in San Antonio just 7 years ago. And so now, fast forward 7 years later, last month I just finished my doctorate in sports management from the United States Sports Academy, where I studied sports leadership. And so I'm looking forward to taking some of that scholarship and knowledge and obviously experiences throughout coaching from California all the way through the state of Texas to share with others.
Awesome. Appreciate y'all sharing that. And so in this, how did you all actually get into coaching? Is this something that you always wanted to do?
Well, my dad, like I said, he was a coach, and I tried to stay, when I went to college, I tried to stay away from education, becoming a teacher, becoming a coach, because that was something that I grew up with, and I wanted to do something different. While I was in high school, I was able to be the station manager for our television show, and I absolutely fell in love with that, and I thought that's what I wanted to do when I graduated from college. But then 9/11 happened, and I saw what those reporters were doing and how they had to be on side, and that wasn't something I was willing to do, was to put my life at risk to show, what was happening in the world. So I quickly decided that I needed to find something else. So that summer when I came home, I decided to coach summer track, and that was a really, really awesome experience because I got to see the kids grow even from the beginning of the summer to the end. And I fell in love with it. And I went back to Georgetown and I said, look, I need to go into education. I think that's it. The following summer, went back, coached the same kids, and that's the end of it. And I said this is what I'm meant to do. And it started with track, which is kind of crazy because track was like the sport that we did to fill time. And I participated in everything while I was in high school, and I played softball. So softball and track coincide. So I would just go and throw every now and then and run whenever they needed me to run, but my focus was on softball. So it was ironic that I was coaching track. And then when I started here at Fox Tech, I didn't know what the word no meant. So when they asked me to coach volleyball, I said, sure. When they said basketball, okay. And then softball, okay. So I coached everything while I was there at Fox Tech, which was a phenomenal experience. And I wasn't from San Antonio, so it was really interesting to learn the city from that perspective because Fox Tech is downtown San Antonio. So it was really cool to learn the history of the school and be with some great coaches there.
Awesome.
Wow, that's a heck of a man. Well, my story is a little bit different. I didn't grow up in a home of and my parents weren't educators. My grandmother worked in neighborhood house and Head Start, so we had education or child development, exposure. I had that. My great aunt, Dr. Geneva Roberts, the late Dr. Geneva Roberts, was also in early childhood development. So I guess you could say I did have the education background, but my introduction to coaching really came from being around great men and great women. My mother was my first coach. I tell that to the people at the PCA workshops. My first coach was my mother. She coached me in baseball because she was a high school softball player. My dad was a basketball player, so I guess maybe I got that the hoop love from just watching my dad play community college basketball. And then my introduction to coaching, like I said, came from those men. It came from Mark Walker and Greg Knoll and Mel McFarland, my little league baseball coaches, basketball coaches. And then obviously from my high school coaches, I mentioned them earlier, Ed Carberry and Zach Peck and Rodney Van. And I usually, when I talk about those experiences, I talk about those two men, Coach Carberry, Ed Carberry, and Zach Peck. They're really the impetus behind me doing this. I started coaching after I left UT. in the spring of '98, I kind of meandered through poorly an experience at San Diego State University, left there, and Coach Carberry kind of pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" He said, "You need to be out here. You need to help." And so that's really how I got started in coaching. I coached my first season with him as an assistant coach, learned a lot about the other side of the game. I already knew kind of a lot from having been raised around him in high school, and then obviously going on to play football at UT. And the coaches there, Nelson Barnes and Steve Bernstein and John Malkovich and those guys, Bucky Godbolt still in Austin on the radio. And so I took those lessons that I learned and I applied them on the football field. I coached some amazing young men. Ed McDonald, who's doing some amazing things with his life in business. Derek Marceau, doing amazing things, played in the NFL, doing some amazing things in business. And Calvin Barrett, who's also a law enforcement officer, doing absolutely fantastic things. And so my introduction to coaching really came from Coach Carberry. And then I walked away when I returned to play football at West Texas A&M, finished there, and just kind of played arena football and worked with young people in different spaces when I was at Job Corps. And to make a long story short, when I was down in the valley playing arena ball, I went to a football game. And I tell this story because I think it's important. This is what really got me back into coaching. I was at the game, and I'm looking at, sitting there in the stands. I'm thinking this is interesting, South Texas football, watching some passionate young men get after it. But I noticed on one side of the 50, there was all of the coaches, and there was like 16 to 20 of them. And that blew my mind because I'm from Southern California. We didn't have 16 to 20 coaches in my entire lifetime combined. So I'm looking at 20 coaches on the sideline in Texas, and I'm looking on the other side of the 50, the entire football team that's not on the field, obviously, is down there, and nobody's talking to them. And I'm waiting. I'm like, hey, man, y'all going to make some adjustments? You're going to talk to these kids? You're going to coach them up? What we doing? And as I'm doing that, I'm not realizing that I'm thinking out loud. So the people in the stands are kind of turning around looking at me like, who in the world are you? Now, mind you, I'm probably the only black man in the stadium. And I'm the biggest black man in the stadium. So they kind of staring at me anyway. And like, what are you talking about? Well, why don't you get out there? I said, okay, no problem, I will. And so I contacted the coach. I was working at a school at the time. So I contacted coach. I said, hey, man, you need some help? And it wasn't really a question. It was more of a rhetorical question, I guess. And so I went and talked to the kids. Now, my head was in a different space because I was still competing as an athlete. And so there were some things that I needed to tone down. And, and as we say, God ain't done with me. So I was not using PCA appropriate language and experiences, but I'm being honest. And so I just shared with some young men the things that I knew, the things that I felt were important to them as young men, and just started evolving more as a man and working through some of my own garbage to have some pretty good experiences. And those young men are doing fantastic works in society, and that's always been the motivating factor for me, is to help young men become great citizens and leaders and fathers in their respective worlds and their spaces. And quite frankly, that's what it's about. And that's how I got there, because Coach Carberry and Coach Peck, they would give me books and they would give me articles to help me become a better man, even when I was running from who I wanted to be and who I was supposed to be. And so the first things I started to do when I got my head on straight is I gave my athletes books and articles about how to be great men. And we just happened to tear up the court in the football field and the track in the process. And that was, I credit them for those lessons, because they never wavered in those things. So that's how I got started into coaching.
Awesome. Well, greatly appreciate you all sharing that. And Fox Tech, man, that brings up memory. Shout out to Fox Tech, who my alma mater, the Sam Houston Cherokees, used to whoop on for many years. But shout out to Fox Tech. And also shout out to PCA. For those of who are tuning in just for this first time, PCA is the Positive Coaching Alliance, where Dr. Goodloe and myself are great colleagues of, and we are speakers, trainers for the Central Texas chapter, which is an awesome organization. It's definitely working towards change based on today's situation in our world, where we talk about racism and social injustice. So when we talk about PCA, that's who we're referring to. And we'll kind of have a link in the show notes. It'll be in the description on the YouTube channel. So if you want to know more about who Positive Coaching Alliance is and what they stand for, you can definitely visit that. But as we move on, we get to the part to now. You all are impacting John Jay High School in San Antonio. And then also we got hit with some news back in March about this thing called COVID-19. So talk to our listeners and let us know how you all, or what were your thoughts and what were your feelings when you first heard about COVID-19?
I think I'll speak for myself before I talk about what we thought. I was a little skeptical at first because living in the Rio Grande Valley, a lot of times things don't hit us until late. Mm-hmm. So we're always behind. And so sometimes my mindset when it comes to like diseases or just anything, culture, that kind of stuff, when I'm a little bit behind in thinking that that's real, that's really happening. So for me, I thought, well, okay, that's happening over in New York. That's not happening here in Texas. Mm-hmm. So when we finally got the word that, yes, we are going to go into this quarantine state, I thought, goodness, what am I going to do? Because I like to be out and about, and my husband does not like that at all. But I like just to go, even just to like the thrift store, different places. And I couldn't do that. And I had my routine of going to H-E-B on Saturday morning. Can't do that. And I remember the first time going while we were in quarantine and seeing the shelves absolutely empty and thinking, oh my goodness, this is real. So that's the personal side of things. But then even for the professional side of things, I knew it was going to be difficult for us, especially being at John Jay, because we have a lot of students who do not have access to technology prior to all of the COVID. So in their homes, they don't even have phones, they don't have computers, they don't have access to the internet. That was troubling because I knew we were getting this information that said that we weren't going to give anything in paper-wise out to our kids. Yeah. So I was wondering how we were gonna handle that academically with them, but more importantly, how are we going to make contact with them? Because some of them were leaving to go to Mexico to take care of family or continue moving south. Mm-hmm. Because as this virus kind of attacked the states, it took a while to get to South Texas, and some of them just crossed the border and went to Mexico, and then some of them stayed here and didn't care about school because they had to take on some jobs, some adult responsibilities, because their families, their parents lost their jobs, or some of them got sick. So those were some of the biggest concerns for us. And, we thought about our students throughout this entire time. And that, I think that was the part that impacted us significantly, because we care a lot about our students, and a lot of what we do is in person. So it was difficult when we could not contact them. So those were some of my thoughts when COVID came about. And then for our son, because he's here and he's not an only child, but he's the only child in the house. He's 8. Yeah. And we live in a neighborhood where there's a bunch of 8-year-olds and they can't go outside. And we're trying to, create these schedules, not formally, but informal schedules where we go out in the morning and then the neighbor goes out at noon, and keeping the kids apart. It's been difficult for sure. And for him to continue with his education, which that's something that we're going to continue regardless of whether we're in the building or here at the house, we had to limit his screen time, because that's not something that he was accustomed to prior to COVID-19. And we did go with what the school asked us to do, and we saw that he was losing some of his penmanship and some of his ability to just be creative, because, let me look this up on the computer. Well, no, you can think of it on your own, and right. That creativity was being lost. So we saw that firsthand with our son, and we know going forward that that's going to be a significant challenge for us as we re-enter the space in the fall, however that may be.
Yeah, and that's the big thing in that, as the transition happened, what was the challenges that you faced from going from a public school setting to a homeschool setting? How difficult and challenging was that?
Well, really, I think the biggest challenge, aside from what Lizette alluded to, was the kids connecting. Obviously, she said that, but was also the schedules being thrown off. So, you have the regular day-to-day schedule where, we're on campus. El Omri School starts at like 7:50 in the morning. We started school at 9 o'clock at the high school, in John Jay and in Northside. But when this COVID thing started, we're all in quarantine, the kids' schedules flipped automatically. So now these kids are staying up all night. They go to bed about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, old people in their minds, right? Well, we're still getting up at the same time. So I'm expecting to instruct my students on things at certain times because of the rhythm that we're in.
Right.
And our schedules are flipped. They're now owls, and now the eagles are soaring. But the kids, they snore. And so that was one of the biggest things. So like we start getting works getting turned in at like 3 o'clock in the morning. They're sending emails at like 2:30. And Coach, can you take a look at this? Well, Coach ain't looking at that email at 2:30 in the morning. And so I think that was like maybe issue number 2. Issue number 1 was obviously the access, because I think when we did this device rollout in our school district, the numbers or the percentages were low. We were like initially maybe like 25%.
Yeah. And
I think we climbed to like 40. I don't think we got much farther past that at this point, and we might be at 50% now. But we are 3 months later, and we may have just gotten to 50%. And I think and I'm just talking about it on our campus, and that's something that's difficult. That's from an emotional standpoint, it's like my wife said, when you are used to going into the room or into the building and you're interacting not only with your 100+ students, but also the young people that are passing you in the hallways, and you get to a point where, like in my classroom setting, I only had 40% of my students were connected and engaged in the learning. And so trying to find them, I know we had students whose folks experienced some deportation and some other things during this time, on top of the illnesses, on top of the the financial hardships. And so there was a lot of families didn't get some of those, didn't get the stimulus checks. And so just dealing, kind of like some vicarious traumas, and dealing with some of the burdens that the students are dealing with, and then also just the desire to want to help, and realizing that your hands are tied, and so that kind of takes its toll on you. I didn't sleep for like the first month and a half. I wasn't sleeping at all. I know we're not supposed to worry. I know from a biblical and Christian standpoint, but I know we're also supposed to tend to the sheep. And that was a very hard initial 6 weeks from a professional standpoint. Not only that, but just personally trying to deal with or reconcile with some of those things. Like, man, what we supposed to do? I can fight somebody one-on-one, but we talking about fighting something we can't even see. And that's. I guess maybe that's one of those principalities, but it's not a principality; it's a virus. So,
right.
Well, even with what William said about the emotional side of things, when other teachers within within the district and across the country were posting, well, my kids are engaged, and my kids, I'm 100%, and they showed up for our Zoom meetings. I'd have Zoom meetings, and he'd have Zoom meetings once a week, and we'd be happy if we got at least one. There were several weeks where I only had 1 student or 2 students. Wow. And I teach freshmen and seniors, and it was important that I maintain that contact with the seniors, because they're making this transition into life. And there was still some loose ends that we had to tie up with colleges and scholarships, and when they weren't communicating, I felt helpless, because I knew that they needed some of that direction, and they needed some instruction on how to even contact some of those colleges and universities to let them know, or to even find out what's going to happen with my money, my financial aid going forward in the fall. Because we have, here in San Antonio, we have the Alamo Promise. So a lot of them decided, I'm not going to go to that 4-year university that I thought I could go to ahead of time before we got into this situation. Now I'm going to go do this Alamo Promise because I've got to stay at home and help take care of my family. Now I'm the breadwinner. I'm working 40 plus hours a week to provide. And, you know, I spoke to one of my students who is one of our high flyers, and she was going to every food pickup spot in the city to get food for not only her home, but for her neighbors, because her parents are undocumented. So she's the person that had to take on that responsibility. And it was tough just listening to those stories and listening to them as they needed to just talk to someone.
Yeah. And that's the biggest, I guess, the biggest challenge of it all, right? We know that there were families who were struggling, getting that assistance for them, foods, for example. You know, when all this thing came about, you know, the whole big old issue was, you know, water and toilet tissue, right? And I'm like, man, what's wrong with people stacking up on toilet tissue, man? What? You know, and so I'm like, look, we're not about to go crazy like Y2K folks did back in that time. You know, they buying up stuff, and you talking about if it's the end of the world, why are you buying up stuff? You know, so you know, it's just one of those. No, you don't need it. The world's gonna end. What's that, right? So, you know, but you know, when this came about, we started going to the store slowly but surely. One, we were still good as far as things, but we just needed to get the small things, the necessities, right? The intangibles, as we call it here. And in that process, it was a tough thing because we started seeing that empty shelves, things of that nature. And it's just like, whoa.
Yeah, that does
Folks,
something with your head.
Yeah, it does something with your head, man. And it's just like, what? And then people talking about hand sanitizer gone and bleach and all this. I'm like, whoa, yeah, I think we're gonna need to do a little bit of inventory and do a little stocking up here. So, you know, in that process, you know, we was always fortunate to not go without something, right? The necessities, I would say. All that other small stuff, that's fine. You know, hey, we don't necessarily need that because we stocking up on fruits, vegetables. We stocking up on, you know, the things that's going to keep our immune system strong. So that was an important piece. So in that, you know, the communication piece was important. How did you all maintain, I know the lack thereof for your students, but with family and friends, how did you all maintain communication?
Well, initially, I mean, I talk to my parents every day, and they're in the Valley, but I have a sister who lives here in San Antonio, and she works for Toyota. So that was that's a big plant, and she's at Human Resources. So she was having to deal with some things. We made sure to get on a group text with her and my other sister, who's a teacher. So we were we've been in communication this entire time. But my extended family, we got on a Zoom call. We set up a Zoom meeting, and we would meet once a week. And my grandmother, who's 86, she was able to log on. So all of us that are I say all of us, all the cousins are out of the Rio Grande Valley, but all of my aunts and uncles, they live down in Harlingen or San Benito, right next to Harlingen. We all were able to get on the calls weekly and speak to one another and just kind of talk about things that we would normally talk about when we were face to face, or hey, let's bring 5 pictures and talk about that, and just to kind of take our minds off of what was going on in the world, to, you know, just to reconnect, because I think this is the most that we've spoken to one another in years. So that's a positive.
Sure.
So we still talk every now and then on the Zoom, because, you know, I have aunts that are we getting on this week, or are we getting on? So we'll get on, and it may just be a couple of us, but it's still good.
Yeah. You know, I'm an only child, and my father passed several years ago. So communicate, and it's just my mother and I, really. I mean, I have aunts and uncles, but just in terms of immediate outside of them, you know, Lizette and Omri, you know, just texted and trying to call and chat, FaceTime with the kids, with my adult sons and daughters. I hate calling them adult children. It just seems strange. My adult sons and daughters, and, you know, FaceTiming with the granddaughter, and you know, Aubrey, and when we can, and texting for the most part, because, you know, that's the way a lot of folks communicate these days. So texting with my sons and daughters, you know, FaceTime with my mom, And that's been absolutely hilarious. You know, my mom is like clockwork. I only have to look at my watch to know what time when she's calling. But you know, this is, you know, for our family in particular, this has been, you know, obviously it's a tough time, but this is a year of first for our family because both my mother's parents passed last fall, and so this 2020 has been a year of first, not only for me as you know, not having my grandparents around, but for my mother not having her parents around, and she was, you know, the caretaker. So just kind of picking up and trying to connect as often as we can, and in the ways that she wants to, and then I want to, and also with aunts and you know, and other relatives as we go. And so that's what we've done. You know, I have Zoom calls with the men I call my brothers, the men I grew up with. I've known since I was 7 for the most part, and I'm 42. So, you know, Saturday nights on the Zoom. Don't come in the office because this conversation is going to be crazy. There's going to be some stuff you don't need to know about daddy. But just the brotherhood and obviously staying in contact with you and Trennis and getting messages from Randy and everybody else. It's just been, I think that's just knowing that there are people that we can fellowship with, and you don't have to be in close proximity to do that. That's been the blessing of technology, obviously. And so that's kind of what we've done with communication.
Awesome. And in that, you know, it has allowed a lot of things that have not transpired. Unfortunately, of course, we all know that due to this COVID, based on statistics and reports, domestic violence rose, child abuse rose. So those type of things are unfortunate. And I believe, though, it allowed truths to come out as well to those families who may not be in that statistical categories, right? You know, what are we going to do, right? We some folks had to really reinvent the wheel almost as a family. You know, we had folks that was just like, man, we played Yahtzee forever, you know, so we became real good at that. So it allowed people to bond because, you know, technology, man, we can be all over the place. You know, I tell my family all the time, and they know this is my pet peeve. Shout out to the McGarrity's. Don't text or call me when we in the same house. I don't understand it, right? Don't do that. Don't come. Let's talk. Let's have some face-to-face conversations here. Let's get some exercise. We on lockdown. We are quote unquote quarantined. So
Right.
Get some exercise, the little that you can get, and come holler at a brother.
Yeah. Exactly.
But it allowed us, you know, to, you know, really come closer as a family because we're close, but it got us closer because we were able to do some things I didn't even know about. There's, you know, we know Uno, but now there's Uno Flip. And I'm like, what? See, here y'all go.
Change the rules, man.
So y'all ruining the game, man. Come on now.
All 37 cards. Ain't my time for that.
Exactly. And so in that time, right, we're where we are today, right? We're in June. We're in the month of June. So, you know, we're slowly and surely coming out of this situation. We're not out of the woods yet. There are transitions in place, especially from a sports perspective, but we're also dealing with a heavy, sensitive topic and an issue when we talk about racism and social injustice. We all know that this thing broke out in a big way just 2 weeks ago when the life of George Floyd was taken. And, you know, based on that, it was very uncomfortable to watch. It was disturbing. It was frustrating. A lot of emotions are built up. Can you all talk to our listeners about your thoughts of where we are concerning racism?
I think I come from a community, and William likes to call it the utopia, because the majority of the people in the Rio Grande Valley look just like me. And the first time I was the other in a space was really when I went to college, because that is a PWI to the max. In our class, we had the largest Latino population with my class that entered, and that was with 35. And now Southwestern is a very small institution. There were 35 Latinos and 5 Black women that were in that particular class. So there was 40 of us, and we all were like this all the time. Mm-hmm. And the majority of us came from the Rio Grande Valley, but there were some from Houston and things like that. So that was my first real world experience. So when you now, from this perspective as a parent, and having been placed in some awkward situations with my own son, and even with, you know, with our older children, it's been interesting. It's been interesting. And I try not to watch some of these things or look on social media, because I get very anxious, and I get angry, and I want to do something. And I feel like if I'm at home, I'm not doing anything. And that's where we differ. And I've been very intentional about not watching a lot of what's on television. And I did not watch the video because I couldn't physically,
Yeah.
I could not, emotionally could not do that.
Yeah.
So I've had some mixed emotions about it, but really my question is how, and what can we do, and what are we going to do now? So that's a conversation that we have every day. Like, well, what are we doing? And I feel like if we're not moving, we're not doing something, then we're a part of the problem as well. So
Yeah.
Well, I mean, those things, like she said, we talk about it, and we differ in the watch. And I know I need to probably watch less, just for my own mental health and my own sanity, and probably my physical health as well, because I have physical response to some of these things. But I also know, or believe, I should say, at this point in my life, I've been inside this magnificently melanated skin of mine since 1978, and I think it's okay for me to feel proud and humbled about being an educated Black man, or just to be a Black man, and to watch another Black man's life taken on the street. That does something to you.
Yeah.
I was already dealing with issues with my students, let alone unraveling and unpacking some of the history with racism, and having personal experiences with police brutality as a child, and having being on the opposite end of a police shotgun, and being held at gunpoint, things like that, and just watching some of those things unfold. It's never a great feeling to experience or witness those things. But like I alluded to earlier, I coach young men and played with men who are in law enforcement. Some of good buddies of mine is in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm not a proponent of the bad apples conversation, because the bad apples conversation seems lazy. I just know there needs to be some type of overhaul. But to answer directly to the question, some of the social injustices that take place have a lot to do with miscommunication and a lack of communication. And I think that, part of a solution forward is the acknowledgement and action, right? So we need some acknowledgement of what's taking place, and we need to acknowledge that there needs to be a change made, and then we need to take action on what that looks like. We need to put some actionable steps into policies, because these are systemic things that are taking place across education, law enforcement, judicial, medical. There's a lot of places where these take place, but I think one of the primary places, and you and I have spoken about this a little bit before, the primary place where these systemic issues involving injustices and racism takes place every Sunday morning in the country. Yeah. Every Sunday morning. As long as we have Black churches and white churches, and we all call ourselves Christians, or the people that call themselves Christians are called, themselves children of God, but we do that in separate spaces, and then we get in these public places and act like fools and heathens. That these problems are going to continue to permeate society, and we're going to be right back in this same spot 40 years from now, because the conversations that we're having today are not new. The brutalities that are taking place in the streets are not new. These engagements with law enforcement, these protests, and I'm proud of the young people for their energy. Mm-hmm. And I know we need to connect that energy. I think it was like in a song, I think it might be like Common or something. We need to connect the wisdom of our elders and the energy of our youth, so that we can find some solution. Because I think this is a great time, because regardless of the circumstances that led us to this point, God is allowing these things to take place. in order for us to do something, do what we've been called to do, which is to love our neighbor.
Exactly.
And that's not something that we do well in this country and other parts of this world. There's no point in lying about it. So I think that going forward, what we need to do is we need to acknowledge, and we need to assess, and we need to take action. So we need these 3 A's to get to work, right? And we need to do those things. So that's kind of, because this anger, we need to use it in a positive way. Like the word says, be angry, but don't sin.
That's right. That's right.
It doesn't say we need to be angry.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the thing. And in layman's terms, in urban's terms, you can be mad, but don't do nothing stupid. That's pretty much, what it says in God's word in the urban terms. Right. Definitely. Exactly. So in this, and I'm asking people often, what are you doing about this? What will you do, or what are you doing about this? And I truly believe that before all of this really broke out, you all have put something in place 3 years ago, and that is Behind the Whistle. Talk to our listeners and let us know what is Behind the Whistle, and how did you all have the vision and start for Behind the Whistle?
So Behind the Whistle started as a conversation on the way back from the University of Texas. We had attended the Black Student Athlete Summit, and we were just inspired by the people that presented. We had a long conversation on the way back, but while we were there with Dr. Leonard Moore, and he just kind of said, well, why not? Why don't you do this? Because we had an idea, and he said, okay, well, why don't you? I'll help you out however I can. And we connected with some people that at the summit that allowed for us to put this together. And what Behind the Whistle is an organization. It's an educational consulting company that brings people together from different disciplines and is really providing some professional development for coaches, for educators, for anyone that is in contact with student athletes or students, really. So we have the mental health and wellness people. We have our social workers. We have our academic people. We have coaches. We try to stay away from the schematics of the games. And okay. I say games because it's all sports, but we are going to venture into that space eventually. But right now I think what we do best with Behind the Whistle is we bring people together and we get them in the same space. We connect them. We allow for them to have engaging conversations and critical conversations that we don't always have at our level. And I say our level at the interscholastic level, but it's really focusing on our P through 16, educational system that we have in place. So Behind the Whistle started 3 years ago, and we have our symposium this summer that will take place. But throughout the year, we put together some smaller meetings, and we call them think tanks, and we get people in the same space, and we have critical conversations about topics or events that may take place throughout the year that people just want to talk about and investigate, do some research.
Wonderful. And in that, again, like I said, this is, 3 years in existence, and it has been phenomenal. It is very educational. I highly encourage, coaches, assistant coaches, I don't care if you're an official, parents, athletes, to be involved in this, but I believe also too, that BTW is for those who are not even engaged in the sports. It's just good education from every sector, every spectrum of life to help us come united with a common bond. It's just for so many in our nation, sports is the vehicle to a lot of things, right? And it helps us a great deal. And so in this, you all have started some great projects. Lizette, you have also started, thinking outside the box. And so before we talk about the main July event, please talk to our listeners about thinking outside the box.
So Think Outside the Box started with a conversation with Haley Eckerman, and she is a highly decorated volleyball player, former volleyball player. She played at the University of Texas, and she went on to play professionally, but she and I became good friends and after reaching out to her last summer to be a part of our symposium, she came, she presented to the kids, and then that's how the relationship started, and we talk every day. So shout out to Haley, because Haley is now at Tarleton State as an assistant volleyball coach. But we saw in the volleyball community, there was a webinar series that was taking place, and there were a lot of coaches, highly recognized coaches that were presenting, but we didn't see anyone of color. And this was taking place, multiple times throughout this quarantine situation. We sat down, we had this conversation, and we said, look, we need to put something together, because in volleyball, the 10% of the participants are people of color. That's not a high percentage. However, that 10% is carrying a lot of those teams that are winning. And for example, here in the state of Texas, at our Final Four, our championship, our volleyball championships, at every classification, at the championships, all of the MVPs were African American young women. Mm-hmm. So, but none of the coaches were coaches of color. So we wanted to create a space that would allow for these women and people of color to come together and speak to one another about volleyball. So that's our focus, is volleyball coaches. We had coaches from every level in our first series. Our second series were professional and current players. Our next series, which is going to be on Thursday, June 18th, and it's going to talk about diversity in volleyball ? And we have some people. We have a woman who started Starlings in Kansas City, and that's a grassroots organization there, and it's a great organization. I highly encourage everyone to listen this week. And then the next one, our final webinar, will be on July 2nd. And that's the one that will have our mental health professionals, our strength conditioning coach. We have social workers on that one that are going to speak about this return to play. Okay. Because I know we have football and basketball players that are back on campus, but volleyball isn't allowed to be back on campus until the end of July, and they start on August 8th with actual practicing and playing. So that there's some issues with that, and we talk about that in our conversation. So that's one of our projects that we've got underway, and I know William and yourself, you've got another project that's coming as well.
Mm-hmm. We're working on the basketball. That development is coming. We'll have the basketball conversation. Similar to inside the 10-foot line and inside thinking outside the box. There's two things that they're doing, Lizette and Haley. I don't think we have a name for it yet. We'll find something cool and flashy. Maybe double dribble, maybe the duality of being black and balling, right? Balling while black. Find something, it'll be good. But obviously we want to be inclusive of the people that we need to be inclusive of, but also want to celebrate and honor the people that are doing things that don't frequently get the shine that they need beyond, as the lady on the Fox News has said, beyond the shut up and dribble folks. So we're going to do more with that. And we're also working on this a concept and a group. It's called The Collective, and The Collective is a group that is being organized that seeks to advance the interests, the education, the athleticism, the entrepreneurship, and just all things related to Black people and people of color, because we want to make sure that we are finding as many ways possible to destroy any barriers that can be destroyed through strengthening and reinforcing our village. It's a return to the spirit of Ubuntu, and we believe firmly with Behind the Whistle that it's important for our village to be strong, because we know that it takes a village to raise a child. But when you're in that village, that doesn't mean that ends when you become an adult. We all need love, and we need help, and we need support. We need people to go and make sure that they're seeking folks that have their best interests at heart. and not just going with the flash of the lights, because flies do that too, and mosquitoes, and that's usually how they get burned and killed.
Yeah.
And so, and you see that coming to fruition with the athletes at the University of Texas, and I apologize for being long-winded, but you see that with the athletes at the University of Texas calling for change.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the greatest changes that we've noticed that is being called for is just to be treated like human beings.
Yeah.
And to be, be considered in some of these things. And I know a lot of folks will say that, tearing down statues and things of that nature does not change anything. And I understand those arguments. But I also know that if you kick a dog too many times, the dog will lay there or will lash out. So you got two choices,
Yeah.
Not going to be any flight. There's going to be a fight, it's going to either submit or it's going to attack. And I'm not suggesting that, that things are be approached inappropriately. Obviously these young folks at UT, the University of Texas, have approached this thing appropriately, and they're going to use, I know it's the catchphrase of the day, their platform to engage in these conversations and make sure that they facilitate change. I don't know how those negotiations will take place, but I'm certain they will, because they need to, and for folks, I don't know, they've already been met with some swift hatred and vitriol, but the same people that will praise and applaud you on Saturday nights while they pack that stadium will be some of the same people who put their knee on your throat when it comes to you moving forward as a professional. And I just applaud those young men and women for their efforts, and even the coaches that are behind them. And I think we need to support those types of things, and that's what we do with Behind the Whistle. We want to make sure that we serve in the holistic development of not only the coaches and athletes and the parents, but the entire village. We want the village to be strong. We want to pray, train, conquer, and repeat, just like your shirt says. That's what we want to do. We want to raise people to think that way and act that way and conduct ourselves accordingly. And so the collective is doing that, also in concert with our nonprofit, Goodloe Group, Inc., and Behind the Whistle, obviously. So, find us. The collective is a Facebook group at this point. We'll transition into more services as we get into the fall, some educational, some development services. We'll have some basketball people. I think there's some folks up there in the Pflugerville, Round Rock area that wear headphones during podcasts that'll help you with some basketball needs. And so we want to connect you where you are. This is not about Behind the Whistle or Lizette and William Goodloe making money. This is about us as a collective group making change and reconnecting with who we are supposed to be, which is, as I said earlier, good neighbors.
No doubt, without a doubt. And so in that, we get to the part to where you all have your third symposium coming up next month. So I want everybody to be able to tune in and to register, but talk to our listeners about what's going to be happening next month in July of 2020.
Woo, get ready. It's a mouthful.
So we have our symposium is transitioning to a virtual symposium for this summer only, because a lot of what we do requires that in-person. We hug a lot of necks. We do a lot of fun, interactive engagement while we're at our symposium. So we're trying to find the best way to do that. But right now, considering our situation, we will be online. We've got some professors that have just joined us these are heavy hitters in the sport management world and are making some big changes. We've got an attorney that's going to talk about ethics in sport, and he's big in the name, image, and likeness realm. We've got people that are going to bring a lot of data, a lot of information that is going to be beneficial as we're moving back into what we are accustomed to, this normal space. So we're excited about it. It's on July 17th and 18th, and the goal is for it to be solution oriented. We're going to provide some of these real world problems that are happening right now, and we have these people in the same space to have the discussion, to have those solutions to take back with them to their institutions, wherever that may be.
Awesome.
So you can find us. You can find that information on our website or follow us on our social media.
Definitely, and we'll provide those links in the show notes, also in the YouTube description below the video. But definitely looking forward to that. Although it's going to be a different dynamic, right? Being via Zoom, I still think it's going to be beneficial. It will allow, actually, in my opinion, more people to tune in because everybody from the nation can be able to tune in, right? As opposed to just people within the Texas or San Antonio surrounding area. So real excited about what this turnout is going to look like. We're going to continue to push it hard over here at the Root of It All to be able to make sure that everybody is catching wind of this. I think this is probably one of the best opportunities to get in your coaching training requirements in without having to leave the comfort of your home. Get your staff involved in this because it is going to be educational. It is going to be uplifting, empowering, and inspiring, in my opinion. But want to be able to thank the Goodloes. Before we leave, I always like to end this show with giving our guests an opportunity to encourage our listeners. What encouragement can you give to our listeners?
I think we want people to continue fighting and do that in a positive way. We know that change is going to take place, and to be prepared to be uncomfortable in the change, but with that uncomfortable status, we are growing and we're learning and we're becoming better people. So it's going to be positive. The change is going to happen.
Absolutely. I think I'll say the same things that I usually say to folks when we're closing up workshops. Just remember that, the power to change, it lies within each one of us. And like I said earlier, with acknowledging things, assessing what's going on, and then taking action, we can exercise our power if we do it together. And just remember that big moments always require big time people. And so the moment can't be big without us. So we need to make sure that we show up and we show up together. And as they used to say back in the day, I don't know if they say this with the young people, you need to show out when you get there. And so make sure you get out there and dominate. So let's do this together. And as we close, we always say, let's build great ancestors together.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you all for that time. Where can people stay in contact with you? Give us some socials.
Woo! Social media. I believe we are Behind Whistle on Instagram. What is that other one? Twitter. You can find us on Facebook, Behind the Whistle. Like I said earlier about the collective, find that on there, and we'll get to connect with you. We want to bring people, things and people and organizations together. We also, I do need to say this if y'all don't mind, we also invite the clergy folks, church folk. We need you to come to these meetings too. These symposiums are not just for folks that are in that just in that specific space. We want the village members to show up because you're important in this process too. Ministers, members, deacons, elders, deacon boards, whatever you are, you can find us on all of our platforms. It's Behind the Whistle, Instagram, Behind the Whistle on Twitter, Behind the Whistle on Facebook. I set up a MySpace page if y'all need me to. You can catch us on everything. We'll get some smoke signals out, whatever we got to do. We want to make sure that we bridge the way to a brand new future that involves all of us reinforcing the spirit of unity and working close together, hand in hand, to make things better for our children and our grandchildren.
Well, greatly appreciate that. And again, want to thank the Dr. William and his wife, Lizette Goodloe, from Behind the Whistle for being with us today. Want to thank you all for tuning in to this second episode of the Root of It All show. We're going to have all their information in the show notes, definitely registration information for the upcoming symposium in July. You could be able to just go to their website as well to be able to do that. And if you could so kindly leave us a good rating so we could be able to get up in the ranks. I can care about being the tops. I just want people to know that we're out there. Definitely thank you for your time. You all go out there and conquer the day, and we'll see you next time.